Hi folks, I'm John. I'm going to show you how to rebuild a cross trainer. So perhaps you've done some work inside. This also applies to a bike. You might have changed bearings, or you might have changed a drive belt or a pulley wheel, axle, something like that. And we're getting to the point of reassembling it, and you need to pay particular attention to the load bearing part. So these are pedal axles, crank wheels, that kind of thing, because the user weight tends to go through these parts. So it's important that you get the assembly of it right, because it needs to be safe, and also you need to make sure you're not going to have any squeaks and rattles and loose bits. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to just prepare the thread here. If you look closely there, you can probably see there's some blue residue near where my finger is in the thread there. That's because this is a load bearing part, and it originally had some thread lock on there. Now, by taking the machine apart, we destroy the thread lock. So what we're going to do is pop a little bit on. So this is Loctite. It's called thread lock. You can find it online quite easily. I'm just going to put a little dab on there, just in preparation for when we put the nut onto that in a moment. Okay, so let's get the crank wheel. So here it is. I need to get the crank wheel positioned right. So the right hand side here is at bottom dead center, which means that my side, the side we're looking at, needs to be at top dead center. So we'll bring that to the top, and then we'll position it onto the axle. And it's a square end on the axle, and also a square hole, so you need to get it lined up. Give it a little tap in, that's nice. Okay, and then we're going to get our nut. So it's a little bit fiddly there to get my fingers into that nut. I run the risk of dropping it down in the hole, so I'm just going to get my socket. This happens to be a 14mm socket. I'm just going to put my nut into the end of the socket there, because that makes life a little easier for me. I can just pop him in, screw it up, finger tight, just makes it a little less fiddly. There we are, so that's ready to tighten up. So let's bring this round to the bottom now, just so you've got a better view of what's going on. So the important thing is now is to get the tension of the nut or the bolt, whatever you have there, set correctly. If we don't get that right, then this whole wheel could become wobbly, and it could also be creaking and making all kinds of horrible noises, and we don't want that. So I'm going to get my ratchet. I'm going to pop my socket onto the end, and we're going to tighten so it's righty-tighty. So we need to put that to the right. So righty-tighty, there we are. And let's just put a little bit of tension on that. So the question is, how much tension is enough? Because if there's the risk that if you overdo this, you'll shear off the end of the shaft and the nut, or you'll strip the nut, and then you'll be back into the situation of having to do yet another repair. So you don't want to over tension it, but equally you don't want to under tension it either. So there's a nice little trick for this. The way I tend to do it is I position the pedal so that I can hold it with my left hand like that. We'll put the socket onto the nut, and then I lean over it, and I lock my elbows and sort of lean down onto the ratchet and just nudge it. So just give it a little nudge. So I'm not really using any muscles at all, I'm just nudging it in, and as I press down, my left hand is holding the wheel in place, so to stop it spinning. Just see if I can get a better view for you, just like that. So nudge, nudge, nudge with my right hand. And by doing it that way, I can feel when it reaches a point where it doesn't want to go anymore. The problem is, if I use my muscles, I probably won't feel that point, and I run the risk of damaging it. Whereas by just doing this nudging, nudge, 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 just like this, it inches it in millimetre by millimetre, and you feel when it reaches the shoulder, when it stops, which it stopped there. So that's tight enough. Now, because I've got thread lock onto my fixing there, that's going to go off and make the joint good, so that nut's not going to spin out. And also the whole wheel assembly here, it's on a square taper, it's all nice and tight, it's not going to be wobbling or giving me any kind of noises.